Howdy gamers. In this video I'm going to be going over the runes for Yone. Yone mid and top lane. I'm not really going to touch on ADC as I don't think that's really a viable role for him, at least where it stands. So in the mid and top lane, it's pretty easy to think about Yone's runes because you can just compare him to Yasuo and you can compare him to ADCs. With Yone, he's just a champion that is basically auto attacks with a couple of abilities. And is very emphasized on how he utilizes attack damage and attack speed because his auto attacks are very important and his Q is basically an auto attack. So that's going to land him in the precision tree pretty easily as there's a lot of things here that give you amplification on auto attacks and reward for auto attacking, with whether it be Fleet of Footwork giving you healing and movement speed, Conqueror stacking up giving you extra attack damage and then extra healing, the Legend tree either giving you attack speed or lifesteal, and then the percentage damage increases in Coup de Grace or even Last Stand giving you more damage if you're low and then more damage on targets that are low. But with this percentage damage increase, it works best on champions like Yone, Yasuo, and ADCs because you need a lot of damage output. So you need multiple sources of damage dealing lots of damage quickly. Because let's say you have this 8% damage increase on something like a mage, like a Syndra, right? 8% damage increase to her ult isn't really going to be that much damage. 8% damage increase to her Q isn't going to be that much damage, but you apply an 8% damage increase to like 6 auto attacks from Yone, or like an auto Q, auto W, auto. You just get a lot more damage off, or a lot more damage amplified by that 8%. So you get a lot of value from it. Other rune trees become not so useful for Yone as, again, like he just gets so much value out of the precision tree. So one problem you run into is like you have to outweigh like a Fleet of Footwork or a Conqueror and then also the rest of the minor runes in this tree. So then if we look at the Domination tree, it's like Electrocute, dealing more damage for hitting 3 abilities. That's okay. You could have extra healing from Taste of Blood with that. If you're trying to play for Burst with Sudden Impact, it's just not going to work out. This champion isn't a one-shot character, even though he can kill characters very quickly. He's better off doing that with like say the extra AD from Conqueror. So something like Electrocute and Sudden Impact isn't really going to change the champion overall. You're not going to turn this champion into, I don't know, a Kha'Zix or something. You're not going to start one-shotting champions out of nowhere just because you have a little bit of bonus damage from Electrocute and then slightly more damage from Sudden Impact, even though you do get value out of the magic penetration and the lethality. It also doesn't work with your itemization, as you're not going to be building extra lethality with that, and the more lethality you have, generally the more damage you're dealing with it. So that, and then the rest of the Domination tree is like very pitiful for a champion like this. You have to get the bonus AD from getting kills and assists, placing wards or clearing wards, not that great. Having healing on your abilities, not so bad. And then having your ult up more often, not so useful. Your ult is already on such a low cooldown. For the Sorcery tree, you could maybe think of something like Phase Rush, giving you more movement speed, but with a champion like Yone, you already have 3 ways to reposition with your third Q, your E, and your ult, and then I suppose 4 ways with your flash. So you can play with the zones and threat of immediately engaging on the enemy well enough that I don't think the extra movement speed from Phase Rush is really going to be that useful, because if you E onto a target, you're probably staying onto them, and even if you had extra movement speed, you probably wanted more damage if you were trying to stay on them and kill them, for example. The rest of the Sorcery tree like isn't super useless for this champion. You could get like bonus AD from Gathering Storm and Absolute Focus, magic damage shield from Nullifying Orb, but it's not exactly that high value. So I'm not in love with it. The Resolve tree, pretty similar to like how you're not going to change this champion into an assassin with Electrocute and Sudden Impact. You're really not going to change him into a tank with something like Grasp of the Undying, and you could run Shield Bash, Bone Plating, Revitalize. This would make you significantly tankier. You could even run Conditioning. Even in top lane matchups where you would run things like this, the trading patterns that would play out, you would be very hard pressed to like actually be winning a matchup that you otherwise wouldn't by just simply running Conqueror and then like conceding the laning phase levels 1 to 9, and then simply being stronger than the enemy, because if you run the precision tree with the Conqueror, then you could tell the enemy, hey, if you don't kill me levels 1 to 9, I'm going to be outscaling you eventually, which is the dynamic of Yone, not only in his kit, but also with his itemization, where he's building a lot of crit items. So with Grasp, it's like you're saying, I don't care about any of that. I'm going to fight as soon as possible. And other melee champions, especially in the top lane, just simply have more in their kit early game than Yone does, and their itemization is a lot easier. Let's say you're playing into Renekton. His base damages are higher. His level 6 is stronger. His itemization early, he can just build as many longswords as he wants. Yone really needs to get a crit cloak early. So let's say you're playing into Renekton, you build double Dorns in a cloth armor, and he builds double Dorns in a cloth armor, and you have Grasp. It's like, are you winning with this? I'm not entirely sure that you are, compared to just running Conqueror, letting the wave come into you, and then farming it, and then once you have one item, and then maybe, let's say you have a static shiv and then a crit cloak and ninja tabbies, maybe that's when you fight him. And maybe you don't fight him at all in the laning phase, and then you just come into team fights with a static shiv, an infinity edge, and you just kill everyone. A phantom dancer, infinity edge, any crit item. I think that's probably a better bet. So it's like all inning a lot of the early game. I'm not exactly sure how it plays out in certain matchups. Like most top lane matchups, you are probably going to be able to find one with Yone once this champion is more discovered, that this rune page is going to be pretty good. But in general, I would advise against it. So that's that. If you're a top laner with 1,000 games on Yone top, let me know if you have any info on running Grasp. And because like Grasp plus Shield Bash, a good combination, and Yone can actually utilize it. And then Bone Plating and Revitalize is going to be giving you a lot of effective HP. And if you were running this page, you could still run Alacrity and then say Last Stand, or even Coup de Grace. Because even if you are playing into tanks, I think you're still going to get good value out of Coup de Grace, given that you have so much DPS. So there's that. The last like niche option that maybe you're interested in would be something like Omnistone, as you could maybe utilize multiple Keystones throughout a fight. But where Yone, again, he doesn't use the other Keystones that well, so it's like you'd be rolling Glacial Augment, you'd slow them once, you'd be rolling Grasp, you could get one Grasp proc off, you would be rolling Aftershock and not be able to proc it unless you hit your third Q or ult, and then when you did, not so useful, and then you would roll one Summon Airy. What? You roll Arcane Comet. I can't even hit it unless I have third Q or W up. Alrighty, I rolled Predator. I'm running at him fast. Like all of these things that you can roll aren't actually that high value for Yone. So yeah, that's exploring like basically. Okay, and Hella Blades. Hella Blades. It might sound really cool. It actually sucks so much. You're gonna like you might think like it's gonna reduce your Q cooldown or something, but like it's just gonna be absorbed in an auto Q auto. And it only speeds up the auto attacks, and it doesn't speed them up by that much. It's not going to speed up the Q either. So that's exploring like all the niche options for Yone that maybe you were interested in. So the more standard options is always going to be Fleet of Footwork and Conqueror. Even with the Season 11 item changes coming up, I still think that Fleet of Footwork and Conqueror is going to be the most primary runes for Yone, just given the nature of his kit. So with Fleet of Footwork, attacking and moving builds up energy stacks. At 100 stacks, your next attack is energized. Energized attacks heal you for 3 to 60, plus your bonus AD, and grant you 20% movement speed for 1 second. So with Yone, if you're playing Yone in the mid lane, which you're most likely doing, and you're playing into ranged champions, Fleet of Footwork is how you basically like subvert a lot of the early game poke. Fleet of Footwork in combination with Doran Shield is going to allow you to endure like most ranged champions in the mid lane, Syndra, Orianna, Zoe. Champions like this, Fleet of Footwork plus Doran Shield is going to make it so that you're able to endure them, and then through enduring them, you're going to be able to just not lose the game outright, and then once you get to 1 or 2 items, that's when you can start fighting them, as you are playing a champion that needs to ramp up, and Fleet of Footwork can help you do that. And then even in the mid to late game, the Fleet of Footwork extra movement speed is going to help you stay on their target once you choose to initiate onto them with your third Q, your E, or your ult. And then the healing isn't so useful in the mid to late game, but it's more about the movement speed at that point. And then it's like, why not phase rush? It's like you're able to proc Fleet of Footwork multiple times throughout an all-in, and then you only really need the movement speed proc once, and you don't need that much movement speed. And then if you run Phase Rush, again, you're in the Sorcery tree versus the Precision tree, and the Precision tree is basically always giving you more value. And then if you were to run Phase Rush, it's like you don't have that extra healing in the laning phase as well. So it's a really expensive trade-off for a whole lot of movement speed that's not so useful. With Conqueror, your basic attacks or spells that deal damage to enemy champions grant you 2 stacks of Conqueror for 6 seconds, gaining extra adaptive force based on your level basically, and then stacking up to 12 times. When fully stacked, you heal for 15% of the damage you deal to enemy champions. This becomes really good for Yone once fully stacked because you have so many different AoE abilities. Your Q can hit multiple targets, your ult can obviously hit multiple targets, and then your W can do so as well. So where you have a lot of AoE and then a lot of damage uptime, you're going to be able to utilize the bonus healing from Conqueror very well. And then where you're building up bonus AD, that's going to synergize pretty well with itemizing crit, as your crit chance is going to be doubled, and then you're basically always guaranteed to crit, the crit dealing more damage based on your AD. So with that, it's like you just inject basically like a little under a BF sword at most stages of the game, basically just a pickaxe at most stages of the game, amount of AD just from attacking the enemy and like basically starting the fight. And then in team fights, the healing becomes pretty crucial, especially if you have a team fighting comp. You really need to consider running Conqueror over Fleet of Footwork, because with Fleet of Footwork, it helps you more in isolated scenarios where you're taking on 1 or 2 targets. But with Conqueror, it's really about hitting multiple targets, so 3 to 5. So if you have a team fighting team comp, really consider Conqueror, because it's going to be giving you way more value in the team fights versus Fleet of Footwork, which can give you more value in the 1v1, so more value in your laning phase, and then more value in team fights if your job is really just to take out 1 target or 2, which Yone can do. Yone can just 1v2 bot laners, for example. So it is situational whether you should run Fleet of Footwork or Conqueror, but hopefully I gave you some good ideas of when to run one over the other. For the secondary runes, I think that Overheal should be good, but just really isn't. Overheal giving you a shield on your excess healing. Since you can't really itemize a lot of healing in the early game, where you're most likely building D shield, even if you had a D blade, Overheal is pretty hard to build up. And then even if you have this shield built up, Yone is kind of okay with not having this shield, because you're going to be on the outskirts of a fight until you can actually like get in and go in. Other champions that utilize Overheal, usually ADCs like Draven, they want to be able to spend that shield HP to like get the party started. Yone doesn't really have to do that, as he can stack up his Q on minions and then go in, for example, or just be hitting the front line and then go in. So even if he has that Overheal shield, it's not going to help him if he's diving into 5 champions, for example. So for the second row here, I think Triumph is going to be your best option. Triumph restores 12% of your missing health and grants you an additional 20 gold on kills and assists. That healing in combination with Conqueror is just going to make it so that like killing a target in fights just becomes better and better, because being able to stay alive longer and that little bit of HP is helping you, because like when Yone is in a fight, he's just staying on targets and auto attacking them. If he just has more HP to survive, he can just get another auto attack off, and if he could just get another auto attack off, he can kill that next target and then just repeat that cycle over and over again. Getting an additional 20 gold on a kill or assist is just kind of icing on the cake. For the third runes here, you have the option of Legend Alacrity, Legend Tenacity, and then Legend Bloodline. Alacrity giving you attack speed, Tenacity giving you, get this, tenacity, that's awesome, and then Legend Bloodline giving you lifesteal. I think for Yone, Legend Alacrity is going to be your best bet. It's going to make it so that with you can really only get a couple attack speed items and Berserker Greaves, and then a Zeal item, whether it be PD or Static Shiv. So with Legend Alacrity, it's going to give you extra attack speed to play with. That's going to help you with your Q, and then also with staying on targets, because the faster you attack, the faster you can move past the enemy as well. That's pretty important for Yone. It's also going to help you with bursting targets and yeah, basically that. With Legend Tenacity, even if you're playing into a lot of CC with Yone, I don't think it's like really required, that you run this. If you're playing into like 6, 7, 24 Maokais, for example, sure, run Legends Tenacity and build Merc Treads. But I think the situations in which you would run Legends Tenacity is going to be pretty obvious when you're playing into a lot of tanks. So there's that. With Legend Bloodline, I don't think it's really that useful for Yone, where you can get enough healing out of Conqueror in combination with, he could itemize Death's Dance, he can itemize Bloodthirster. He has a lot of ways to get lifesteal through items, whereas he doesn't have a lot of ways to get the attack speed. So for the third runes, I'd recommend Legend Alacrity. If something was to change with itemization next season, where there's just not a lot of lifesteal, maybe Bloodline would gain value for Yone. For the fourth runes, you're choosing how you get the percentage damage increase. Coup de Grace giving you 8% more damage to champions who have less than 40% HP. Last Stand giving you 5 to 11% increased damage to champions while you are below 60% HP. So with Yone, again, it really depends on team comps. I think with Fleet of Footwork, you're probably going to get more value out of Coup de Grace because, again, you're trying to isolate one target and finish them off. With Conqueror, I think you could probably get more value out of Last Stand because if you're playing for team fights with Conqueror, then you're going to be skirting around the team fights with lower amounts of HP because whenever you go into 5 champions, you are just going to be taking more damage than if you go into 1 champion. So if you're surviving in the fight with lower amounts of HP, you're getting this higher amount of damage or percentage damage increase because with Last Stand, it's 5 to 11%. With Coup de Grace, it's only up to 8%. So you can have higher percents. And let's say you're at like 40% HP, or let's say 30% HP, and then you have third Q, you ult, you auto third Q, auto W, auto Q, for example. That's a lot. All of that gets 11% damage increase versus the 8. On all targets, regardless if they're below 40% HP, can potentially be more useful. So depending on what you're playing into and who you're playing against, really consider Coup de Grace or Last Stand. So if you're playing into more tanks or more bruisers, then Conqueror and Last Stand is going to be just more valuable. If you're playing into squishier targets that deal more damage, Coup de Grace and Fleet of Footwork generally is going to be better. For the secondary runes, you have good options in the Domination tree, in Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter. Like I said, you might be thinking about like Sudden Impact, where you do get this bonus damage. This bonus damage isn't going to make or break like anything compared to Taste of Blood. And then even Ravenous Hunter, I'm not like a huge fan of on most champions because with Ravenous Hunter, you do have to stack it up. And once stacked up, you probably already won or lost the game from that point. And you're healing off the abilities. So you're going to be healing off. I'm pretty sure Yone's Q heals off abilities. And then your W and then your ult. And also your E. To get value out of that for Yone, I'm not like super certain on really like how useful it is. I would think that you could just run Taste of Blood with like Ultimate Hunter because having your ult up is very, very important for Yone, especially in solo queue. And you're not going to be able to itemize any CDR. So with Ultimate Hunter, you do have to stack it up with Bounty Hunter. So you have to get kills and assists to stack it up. But the value for stacking it up is just having your ult up more often. So in the mid to late game, you can just be fishing for ults and see like what you get without having to really respect it being on cooldown. Because with Ultimate Hunter, you can ult, have one fight, and then regardless of how it goes, you could go to farm. If another fight happens, your ult is up again. And the more chaotic the situation, kind of the better Ultimate Hunter becomes. And in solo queue, this situation is basically always going to be chaotic. So becomes pretty high value. You also have good options in the Resolve tree. All of these being pretty useful. Yone can run Shield Bash. Yone can run Second Wind. Shield Bash giving you another trading tool. And Second Wind giving you extra healing whenever you take damage. Shield Bash, if it's not like with a Grasping and Dying, like another trading tool where you're dealing damage as well, loses a lot of value. So you're probably better off running something like Overgrowth or Revitalize. All of the third row for the Resolve tree are pretty good. So with Overgrowth, you gain HP for being near minions that die, and then once you absorb 120, then you gain 3.5% maximum health. Basically what that means is you're getting a Ruby Crystal, about a Ruby Crystal mid-game, which is really good. That's really high value. With Revitalize, your heals and shields you cast or receive are 5% stronger and 10% stronger on targets below 40% HP. This, in combination with like Conquer, would be giving you pretty good value. It's kind of annoying because you're always going to be spending your W, and then you're also not going to be maxing the W, so the W shield actually isn't that important. So it's actually kind of hard to utilize the bonus healing from Revitalize unless you're running like Conquer and actually team fighting. Unflinching is also a kind of good option. With Unflinching, you gain 10 Tenacity and 10 Slow Resist. These values increase up to 20% on both based on missing health, and the max value is at 30% HP. With this, in combination with Legend Tenacity and then Merc Treads, you'd be able to stick on targets like basically no matter what, and especially if the enemy has like low damage, which most of the time where you'd be running Tenacity, you'd be running it into tanks, and with tanks, they're going to have less damage, so it's just like a double whammy to have something like Unflinching and Tenacity and then Merc Treads if you're playing into the right team comp. So it becomes situational, but is very, very useful. And for a champion like Yone that wants to E in and then stay on targets, it has pretty good synergy. Second Wind, helping you survive the laning phase as well in combination with Fleet of Footwork and then Doran Shield. You can kind of imagine Yone kind of like an AD Kassadin in a lot of ways, where you do just kind of get beat down in most matchups in the early game, especially against ranged champions. Even though Yone does have potential to outplay like way more than Kassadin, once you get to higher MMRs, that kind of dissolves for the most part. And then it's more about like what can you run in the runes, because you're starting with the runes, and even if you could run more defensive items, you would have to get to those. So the runes becomes way more impactful, and then it's like what can you run defensively in the runes to survive the laning phase to get to the mid to late game without a deficit, and then actually flip the matchup in which you become stronger than your laning counterpart. Second Wind is one of those, and then Fleet of Footwork is one of those to just give you more effective HP throughout the laning phase. Something like Conditioning, where you gain 9 armor, 9 magic resist at 12 minutes, could be okay. It's just that without an Earth Dragon or something, like Yone doesn't get any resistances until Death's Dance, and then Season 11, I'm pretty sure Death's Dance won't work that way anymore. So if there's ways for Yone to itemize armor and magic resist pretty easily next season, then I suppose Conditioning rises in value. But where it stands now, it's just not that good. So for the Shards, it's like every ADC champion you've ever played: attack speed, adaptive force, and armor. If you're playing into magic damage, then run magic resist. If you're playing into slower mages, champions like Vigar, Malzahar, you could consider running armor, where they would be attacking you a bit, auto-attacking you a bit, and then whenever you would trade against them, you'd be taking mostly minion damage. But for the most part, if you're playing into mages, AP damage, obviously run the magic resist, and then if you're playing into AD, run the armor. So just a brief recap for if you're playing into a ranged champion with a lot of poke, Fleet of Footwork with Coup de Grace and then Second Wind and Overgrowth is probably going to be your best bet, helping you endure the early to mid game and then really spiking in the mid to late game. If you're playing into melee champions and you're playing to team fight, then Conqueror and Last Stand is going to be giving you way more value, and then you could even run Taste of Blood and then Ravenous Hunter to have just more healing whenever you're actually fighting. And then if you're trying to have more impact through your ults, then Ultimate Hunter is also a pretty good option, especially if you're running Conqueror, because you're probably playing for team fights. So that's my thoughts on Yone Runes, and I hope that helps. If it did, please leave a like on the video. It's how you can help me. You can subscribe for more League of Legends content and check out other videos that I've done. And if there's any changes for Yone in Season 11 for the runes, then I'll let you know. There'll be an updated video, so you can look out for that already. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.